One important government intervention that we explore in detail in the AS level exams is the indirect taxes. Before I talk about indirect taxes, I would like to talk about taxes in general. When we look at taxes, we have two categories of them. One is what we call direct taxes, and another one is what we call indirect taxes. We've looked at direct taxes before, but let's just quickly have a recap so that we can differentiate between direct and indirect taxes. When you look at direct taxes are basically on income, while indirect taxes are basically on expenditure. Because direct taxes are on income, they lower our disposable income. So whenever the direct taxes go up, the disposable income will fall, which is income after tax. And because disposable income, Y for income, will fall, we will see our demand to fall. So direct taxes are basically those taxes that can affect our demand for goods and services, because for the fact that they affect our income, they make our demand for normal goods to go down. Normal goods are those goods where income goes down, the demand goes down. Indirect taxes, on the other hand, are taxes on expenditure. So when you look at indirect taxes, these are taxes like sales tax, like value added tax. And as a result of that, these taxes will result in our supply to fall because the cost of production rises. When you put an indirect tax, it's a tax which makes the cost per unit to go up, which will make the supply to fall. So direct taxes are taxes that affect our demand side, while indirect taxes are taxes that affect our supply side. So in the case of direct taxes, demand falls, while in the case of indirect taxes, supply falls. Now let's look at indirect taxes in detail. When we look at indirect taxes, there are two kinds of indirect taxes that we want to look into. One is what we call ad valorem tax, and another one is what we call specific tax. What is ad valorem tax? We say ad valorem tax is basically also called a percentage tax. Now, percentage tax would be, for example, a tax of 10%. While so this is like ad valorem or value added, while a specific tax is basically a flat tax of, for example, $5. Now I want to show you this in terms of a diagram as well, because when you look at indirect taxes, the ad valorem tax we'll soon see will result in a non parallel shift of the supply curve. But for specific tax, it will lead to what we call a parallel shift of the supply curve. So let's see why this happens. So let's say if I put a tax of 10%, let's say if this is my supply curve, something which is for, let's say, $10, with the 10% tax on that, let's say this is 5 quantity that is being sold, $10, 10% will be 1%, or the price will be after tax will be 11. But if the value goes up or the price goes up, for example, let's say with a $20 good, the tax will be not $1, the tax amount will be more. So let's say at 10 units, the price is $20, the tax amount will not be $1 but will be more, will be something like $2, and making the price to become $22. So we can see that the supply curve will be shifting in a non-parallel manner, because the tax amount, which is this distance AB, is only $1. But as the amount or the price goes up or the value goes up, because it's a value added tax, the distance, let's call it XY, will be more. For example, will be $2, and therefore price after tax will be $22. So what I'm trying to say is that whenever you have an ad valorem tax, the higher the price, the higher the tax amount, because in this case it's a percentage tax. So 10% of 10 is $1, but 10% of 20 is $2, and that's why there's a non-parallel shift of the supply curve. On the other hand, when you look at a specific tax, it's the same amount. Let's say if I'm putting a $5 tax. So for example, if this is my supply curve before, and let's say my price was $10, I'm selling 5 units. Now when you put a $5 tax, the tax amount is not changing, supply curve shifts backward. the supply curve shifts backward in a parallel manner with the distance, no matter what the price is, will be the same. So, for example, something which was sold for $10 will be now sold for 15, while something which was sold for $15, let's say, will now be sold for 20 after tax. So the distance, let's say AB, is equal to this distance, for example, XY, and that distance is $5, which is the amount of the tax. So that's why it's a flat tax, which results in supply curve to shift backwards. So one thing to remember, ad valorem tax is a percentage tax, so therefore a non-parallel shift, while a specific tax is a flat amount of tax, which means it's a shift backward or upward by the same amount, so it's a parallel shift. Now let's look at why does government put indirect taxes to begin with. Well, there are a variety of reasons why government would put indirect taxes. The first reason why they want to do that is because government needs revenue to finance their own expenditure, and indirect taxation is one source of revenue. So as a source of revenue, the government will put these indirect taxes, and the money they have they can spend on public goods, merit goods, or their own expenditure. Secondly, some goods are very harmful and governments may want to reduce the limit of their consumption. For example, demerit goods like cigarettes and alcohol, and sometimes goods like petrol, which are causing pollution or which are expensive, and the government may want to put indirect taxes so that consumers use it wisely. Lastly, government may also want to put indirect taxes whenever they wish to switch expenditure away from imports and towards domestically produced goods. So domestically produced goods sometimes may be losing out to imported goods, or they might be relatively more expensive. So the government can make imported good expensive by putting tariffs, and that is an indirect tax which results in people to then not buy foreign goods but buy domestic goods. Let's now look at some of the consequences of indirect taxes. Well, we'll soon see with the diagram that the indirect tax will make a good more expensive. As we said earlier, it will result in a cost of production to go up, and therefore it will make the good more expensive. So the price of the good will go up. Not only that, it will also decrease the amount which is going to be consumed and produced, because it's like a rise in the cost of production, and we'll soon see consumers will find the good to become expensive and they may cut down on the quantity consumed. Lastly, we'll also see that because indirect taxes are then paid to the government, it will result in government to make revenue as well, which is good for the government as they will be able to spend that money in terms of public goods, merit goods, or for their own expenditure. So let's see all of this in terms of a diagram. When we put an indirect tax on a good, the supply curve will shift to the left. So let's first draw a demand and supply curve for a good, right? And let's say currently without indirect taxes, the price is P naught. And let's say the price P naught is $10 and the quantity bought, let's say, is 100. Now the government put an indirect tax of $4. Now this is a specific tax which will mean that the supply curve will shift to the left by $4. So the new supply curve is S1 shifting backward, and the vertical distance between the two supply curves will be my cost of the tax or the tax amount. So this vertical distance will be seen through the new equilibrium price. Let's say the new equilibrium price is P1. Let's say it's $12, and I'll talk about why it's going to be $12 in a little while. But this distance we know, this distance, for example, A to B is our amount of the tax, and let's say the new quantity is now going to be 80 units. So the first thing to notice is why is the price not 14 after tax? Because if the tax is $4 and the price was 10, the price, why isn't it 14 versus why is it only 12? And the answer to this is that the way the demand supply curve is meeting, we'll soon see that the good isn't perfectly inelastic. And as a result of that, because it's a downward sloping demand curve, the price isn't really going up by the whole amount, which means that this good has some part of it being paid by consumers in terms of taxes, and some part of the tax is being paid by the producer. How much is that going to be, so let's say if the price is 12 and the tax amount is 4, so this vertical distance is going to be 4 AB, which means let's call this P2 to be $8. So what is the price consumer is paying? And the answer is the consumer is paying the new equilibrium price, which is 12. Then the government takes away 4 from that, and the producer is left with only $8 of the amount, which means the $4 tax is being paid by both consumers and producer, where the consumer burden or consumer incidence is going to be $2, while the producer burden or incidence will also be $2. And the way we figured it out is by looking at what's the price after tax. So the price after tax was $12. So consumer previously was paying $10, is now paying $12, which means effectively the tax has made his price to go up by not 14 but by only 2, which means this is his burden. $2 will be his burden. On the other hand, producer was getting 10 before, but now after tax he's not getting 6, he's only getting 8, which means he's paid $2 of that tax, which was total of $4. Let's also look at consumer surplus and producer surplus in this case. So consumer surplus is simply area under the demand curve above the market price. We know this, that before, let's say when the price was P naught, our consumer surplus is going to be area 1, which is going to be this triangle. Let me extend this further a little bit, plus area 2, this is area 2, plus area 3. Why? Because area under the demand curve above the market price is consumer surplus. So consumer surplus is going to be area 1 plus 2 plus 3. On the other hand, for producer surplus, let's extend these lines also all the way till the end. Producer surplus is area under the market price above the supply curve. So my producer surplus will be area 4 plus this rectangle, area 5 and area 6. So producer surplus will be area 4 plus 5 plus 6. Remember, the quantity bought is 100 and the price is $10. Now after the tax, so let's also write this, after tax the quantity is now going to be 80 and the price is going to be $12. So consumer surplus is only this area 1. So my consumer surplus will fall to area 1. So clearly consumers are worse off. Producer surplus on the other hand will be, if the price was $12, producers are only getting $8 because 4 is going to the government. So producers are left with 8. So this is the price P2 which they are getting, and this is the supply curve for them. So area 6 will be the producer surplus, which means we're left with area 2, 5 and 3, 4. Now 3, 4 is a quantity that was never bought in the market, because as we said, the quantity bought and sold will go down. So area 3 and 4 are no longer in this sort of equation, because now this quantity is not bought. So this 20 units that are not being sold, we will call this 3 and 4 to be our social welfare loss, because this area didn't go to any parties, be it consumers or producers, as the quantity sold is now gone down to 80. But 2 and 5 we say is what we call our government tax revenue. Why? Because the vertical distance AB was the amount of the tax, which was $4, right? So this area 2 plus 5, we are saying this is tax revenue, and the amount will be $4, which is P1 minus P2 times 80, 4 times 80, which is going to be total amount equal to $320. So in terms of the consumer burden, if I go back to this part, guys, the consumer burden of $2 is, if you look at the total amount of it, is $2 times 80 or $160, or in other words, area 2 is what we call the consumer burden of the tax. Okay, and area 5 is what we call our producer burden of the tax, which is also $160. So let me write this as area 5 as the producer burden of the tax. And that's why These were the amounts which were previously with consumers and producer, but now after tax, the government takes it away, and therefore consumers and producer are both paying the tax. So a lot of times we see a tax that is being put. The tax, whenever we put an indirect tax, it is put on the producer, but it's paid partially by consumers, partially by producers, and the amount, we'll talk about it in the next video, will be determined through the elasticity, as in who will pay more tax. But the consumers and producer will both pay the tax, and the government basically, when it pockets this revenue, it will also result in some consumers and producers to be worse off, because now some quantity that is being sold in the market is no longer sold, because the tax will make the good to become expensive. So the price will go up and the quantity sold will go down for this good. In the next video, we'll talk about indirect taxes more in detail and talk about how elasticity will affect the consumer burden and producer burden of the tax, and also the quantity and price of the good after tax. And also, we'll look at the pros and cons of indirect taxes as a policy tool for the government. If you like the content you just saw and all the other content that is on my website, then you need to head over to altacademy.org, where you will find more content, not only of my subject, but also 5 other subjects. So go there.